Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. Can I please ask you to find your seats as we get started with our final panel for this conference? I know you've already had your workshop sessions this morning, so I know that you're ready for some coffee, or hope you've already had some. How was the Castle Festival for everyone? You enjoyed it? Who got more than 6 hours of sleep last night? Few hands. Who got less than 4? Also a few hands. Brave people here today. Wonderful. Well, I'm glad that you slept. I'm not going to say I'm glad that you slept well, but I'm glad that you slept. Just a reminder, did everyone bring your luggage with you this morning here to Schleining? Wonderful. A reminder also that we have QR codes that will send you to a little feedback form. We would really appreciate it if you fill that out. That really helps us. So we have one final panel planned for you before we close. And in keeping with the theme of this year's forum, it will concern the art and craft of building peace. As you in this room all very well know, peace does not emerge automatically. It requires institutions, it requires relationships, and it requires social systems to manage conflict constructively over time. The goal for this panel is to explore how we can design peace architectures that strengthen resilience, that support reconciliation, and that address the root causes of conflict, and of course to do all this in an increasingly complex global landscape. So your moderator today has asked me to give him at least an hour-long introduction, so let me read from Wikipedia, as I know, I'm joking. To introduce your speakers and the topic, it's my pleasure to introduce your moderator. He's a peace and conflict transformation advisor, facilitator, and trainer in Lebanon, Jean-Paul Chami.
Thank you. Well, hello, marhaba. A big pleasure and a privilege to be here today with you. 20 years later, I kept telling people that I came across that 20 years earlier, I was here as well, attending what used to be called the European Peace University, a master's program that ran for many years under the leadership of many amazing people, Gerhard Mader, the late Dietrich Fischer, also the late Johann Galtung, and also the late Marshall Rosenberg. So perhaps we're looking at perhaps a new generation of peace builders, and their legacy goes on and on. So very honored to be part of that legacy. This panel, this part of the forum, would not have been made possible without the contributions of many. Of course, the ACP staff, Bernadette, Eva, and everyone else, of course. But also Jean-Paul Lederac, whom I think most of you are familiar with and with his work, also had his inspiration and touches as well. So I must acknowledge him. The very premise of all this started with the term infrastructures of peace. And then when I had an exchange with John Paul, he said that he has developed over time a love and hate relationship with that term. As he's seen later on, most have focused on the institutional aspect of peace infrastructures, but not necessarily on the human and relational aspects. So for him, it's rather a collectivity of people coming together, discussing things, learning more about one another, and daring to dream and daring to imagine a better future for the society that they are serving. Which reminds me of one of his theories of change that he calls the critical yeast. That is a group of people who are able to knit together, to weave together, an imagined better space and better place for a community. Another foundation for this panel is a trio, and that trio is the following. It's the importance of institutions, and our panelists will touch upon that. It's the importance of resources and capacities for peace, and they will also mention that. But it's also the quality of the human relations that are knit and created, and it's how these three will actually interact. This panel is a space to reflect. So there are some guiding questions which I will share, but eventually it rests upon our panelists to share their reflections. There's something a bit intriguing about the timing of this panel. It comes at the very end of a journey, the 4th Austrian Forum for Peace. But also, it so happened that the 5 of us also took part in a parallel journey as well. A journey related to exploring the arts for peace, not just as a way to present peace, but also a way to think peace. So yeah, I think I'll stop here and allow me to introduce our very first panelist, who actually led, in addition to 2 of her amazing colleagues, Telervo and Aniko, who are here with us today as well, and led the Peace and Arts workshop. So Rana Yazaji is a researcher, trainer, and cultural manager, executive director of an organization by the name of Artas Foundation, the Swiss Foundation for Art in Regions of Conflict, and currently conducting artistic research on contemporary arts, popular culture, and peace building during and in post-war context at the Zurich University of the Art. Her bio goes on and on. Of course, you can always check our panelists' bios in the brochure. But without any further ado, I would like to give the floor to Rana. Also asking her to comment and reflect on some of the following questions, some of which are: at the moment of designing a given peace process or agreement, what assumptions would you make about how peace would unfold, and which of those may have proven wrong? Where did the transition from agreement to implementation break down most significantly? And in hindsight, what kinds of infrastructures may have been missing to sustain peace territorially? And if you were to design a process today, what would you prioritize differently? Of course, these are very complicated questions. Rana, feel free to take us on a small trip of reflections based on your experience as somebody from a war-torn country and longing for peace, but also as a peace and arts practitioner.
Thank you, Jean-Paul, and thank you for everyone who remained in the room till the last day. As Jean-Paul has just mentioned, we were spending long time together in the workshops, and it's great to be able to sit together and talk about what we experienced with our bodies, imagination, memories. Sometimes many of our colleagues are also in the room, so I look forward to the conversation after. Briefly, Jean-Paul also mentioned that I work as a practitioner, so in institutions, working in conflict region. In a parallel track, I'm a researcher. So this is a privilege to be able to do actions and to work in relationships with people and have the space and someone supporting you to have the time to analyze that and look into what are we actually creating when we speak about art in conflict regions. Also, biography, personal biography. I come from an art a conflict region, but I work in different conflict regions also, which gives me this duality of being insider, but also an outsider to where I work, which is a privilege, but also a huge responsibility that I really don't take lightly. So from all of this, and because art as well as peace building are very context specific, all my examples today in this very short talk will be context specific, and I will take Armenia and Armenian artists' quotes and mediators there as my base of arguing on how can the art really be part of peace building and not about the values and the narratives that I think most of us, if not all of us in this room, already share. We don't need convictions of that, but I need to show, in my opinion, where the gaps are and where do we struggle, what are the limitations. So this is where it goes. Going back to Armenia, an example from last October, 2025, we were with a convoy of artists from very different places, from Sri Lanka to Syria to Georgia, Germany, Switzerland, we were in Goris. That's a town in the Sunnik region in Armenia. Who knows Armenia knows that this is a new border region. It didn't used to be border region. It is now. We were working on a very community-based, art-based approach to looking. It is archaeology in the presence, the project name. And by archaeology, we dig, but not in artifacts and not in history, but we dig in the everyday life of people living there, being with their bodies, confronted on a long-term basis with war and consequences of war, including displacement, economic degradation, memories, traumas, etc. So we were working in October there. In that very same month, there have been negotiations and new demarcation of the border. Diplomats and peacebuilders were also looking at maps from the Soviet era, and a village was demarcated in the same month. 12 houses were passed to Azerbaijan from this village, and people were told to leave those houses. And this is what happened. Those two processes were happening in parallel, in the same place, in the same time, with no connection at all between each other. And in my opinion, that's not a lack of coordination. It's not about communication. It's a structural symptom of how do we create peace. So this is where I see the gap. We speak a lot about needing networks, needing spaces for conversation, but I think there is a task before that, which is to look at the structures and the mechanisms and the processes themselves. So here I go back to Lederach, who to quote when we speak about art and peace building. He mentions relationships, curiosity, creativity, and risk as being the four skills or needs of mediators. But those are the same that artists deal with. They deal with trust issues, both of them. They deal with uncertainty, fear of future, but also fear of repetition of the past. They both deal with the need of imagination in very different ways. But I would argue, and being from the art sector, maybe I take liberty in arguing that there are not much differences in the crafts of mediators and artists. Or at least there is a lot in common. So I don't see the problem or the gap being between the people in this room. I see the gap being more in how we do the work. So on personal level, I think we all agree in the breaks, we all speak, and we get enthusiastic about how those words could be connected, but the structure does not allow. Mainly, I would give one argument, which is the more formal peace processes allow for rational imagination. Changing situation from positionalities to needs of the communities and the societies. With the art, we have the aesthetic imagination that does not have a space in the more formal processes, with brilliant exceptions that we can study, but I see those exceptions to be anecdotes and good examples that we can start with, but they don't change that structurally there is something missed still. I will mention 3 learnings I've got from this research in Armenia and connect them to what could we do, also 3 suggestions to what we could do to start exploring those different words. So first learning I had from Armenia is that people imagine peace in fragments. People who live through conflict do not imagine the comprehensive peace we aim for in the peace-building processes. They imagine it by their son coming back from the military service. They imagine it by being able to do something that they were not able to do during war or conflict. So this fragmentation, this understanding of the daily fragments of what lived peace is how people imagine peace. And this is what we learn as artists. I see Telervo also agreeing on this. This is what we learn from working with communities because we base our work on relationships. So this is where it comes from. Very quick example, and you will tell me when I speak too much.
Will do.
Very quick example, in this very same project in Goris in Armenia, a Pakistani artist, Habib Afsar, decided on one day to join Areg Balayan. Areg is a wonderful documentary filmmaker and photographer from Nagorno-Karabakh, the disputed region between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Habib joined Areg in this excursion of photography, and Areg says rapport to people comes before the image. And he was doing portraits of people of Goris. And in this excursion, I was with them as well. We met an ex-fighter who fought in very different wars in the world and now cannot travel because of an international arrest warrant. And when he knew that Habib is from Pakistan, he was like, why Pakistanis fought in this conflict here? And of course, our artist was not ready to be in this situation. So he said, I'll quote, I don't know. I'm here to listen to your story and share in your life for a moment. I'm a mercenary of love. And this is important for me, for whatever it's worth, I'm sorry. I don't know what he was sorry for, but he could say he's sorry.
Rana, we have about 2 minutes left.
Okay,
for your presentation.
so I will say just a few things from. So at the end, I want to go to the idea of pieces of peace that Habib shared with us. He said, I realize the art is not the photograph itself because they did a portrait, both of them together in that moment. It is the encounter. The photography is just an artifact, a memory. The camera is a tool. The clicking is a ritual. Was the portrait an excuse for the encounter or the other way around? Does it really matter? And if the art lies in the relation, then who really is the artist? Have we made a piece of peace with the click of a camera? I will jump. So my proposals are for both peace builders and artists. 3 proposals very quickly, just headlines. Redesign how community knowledge enter formal processes. And I have a lot to say about that, but I won't. Build genuine shared practices, not shared panels. This is very important, but this is not joint peace building. This is just to start thinking together. So participating in conferences is a great starting point. And then joint advocacy, because the art sector and the peace building sector have very different ecosystems. And none of them can create a common structure together. It needs joint advocacy, including joint thinking, joint fundraising, joint programming, and joint attempts on small or large scales. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rana, for sharing these reflections. I'm sure I can see your notes. They can go on for a while. We're lucky that we will follow on with a World Cafe. Then you will also have the chance to approach Rana and the other panelists. But also, Rana, you'll also have the chance perhaps to share with us some additional insights.
Yes.
So thank you so much for that. Our second speaker, our second panelist is from South Sudan, Kuol Arou Kuol. We're very privileged and happy to have him join us. So Kuol is a refugee leader, peace builder, and practitioner associate of the Unyoke Foundation, which I had the privilege to attend its work in Uganda, but they do a lot of their work in South Africa as well and in other places. bringing together peacebuilders to connect and to replenish their energy in order to be able to spread their messaging in a more effective way. Over the past 9 years, Kuol has been part of course, of the Unyoke Foundation and accompanying journey of a wider community of peacebuilders. He is a long-standing member of the network 641M, 64 Children of One Mother, a multi-ethnic network of South Sudanese and Ugandan peacebuilders committed to fostering relationships across divides and strengthening the social fabric of their communities. One quick thing before I give you the floor, Kuol, is that yesterday I received by mail from John Paul Lederach again, one of his recent publications, The Centuries Wrap Around Us. And as you know, John Paul is very keen on sharing personal stories and perhaps even our panelists, I know how keen they are on sharing stories. So I decided to do something, a small exercise in the morning. So I thought, okay, maybe I'll use this. You know, sometimes we do this, just opening it randomly to a page, and perhaps that would be of inspiration. So the first page that I got, and I marked it here, I hope, yes I did, was page 114, which surprisingly said, using the words of John Paul, of course, I have friends in South Sudan. They are youth, they carry the wisdom of ancestors. They are unusual, they inspire. They were born in the burning grounds, sometimes we call those civil wars. They are anything but civil. Wars bear a long legacy which no child asks to be born to and no grandparent wishes to bequeath. I have spent a lifetime, I'm not going to read the whole book, okay, just bear with me, just one page. I have spent a lifetime wondering, if nobody wants them, why are wars so hard to end? And lastly, he says, my friends in South Sudan have become my teachers. In the middle of daily violence, they are stitching the fabric of a country without war. It feels that in this 3-4 day conference, that term stitching and weaving and knitting has become perhaps a rooting and an anchoring term for us. Now, of course, you can imagine, because of my excitement, I tried to do the same. So I started opening the book to random pages. Perhaps I get more inspiration for the other panelists. It just didn't work out. It worked only the first time and with you, Kuol. So sorry to the losers on the panel. But I'll find other, hopefully more inspiring ways to introduce you. So Kuol, networks are very important. We know this for a fact. They're very challenging, never easy. They take a lot of time. And most of the time, we don't seem to have that much of it. So in your experience, leading a network, being part of a network, traveling extensively, and turning from having experienced a war to being an agent of peaceful change, perhaps a few questions for you. Perhaps in the early days of your work on and with networks, what was the actual problem you were trying to solve? And what made a network the right response to that? What made the network alive? What were the invisible elements that sustained it over time? At what moments did the network almost fail or perhaps fragment, and why? And maybe similarly to the question that I asked Rana earlier, if you were to start the network today, or a network, what would you differently in terms of building and sustaining that massive work? The floor is yours, Kuol.
Thank you very much, JP, and hi, everyone. I will start by saying that I came here as a substitute, and I hope I will do what a substitute can do. Usually, for those who know football, a substitute is expected to score a goal because the first player has not done well. That's not I'm from South Sudan, and I think I will start by giving you the context of my country. We have been ruled in unending wars for the last, I would say, 500 years. 500 years because it has history of colonialism that made it more complex. These conflicts are, as I said, over 500 years old. And when we became independent in 2011, we thought that was the end of it. We would have a new country and we will start something that is our own. But then came struggle for leadership, struggle for power, and we went back to war again. But for all this time that we have been at war, it's not like we didn't have people who wanted peace. I would say the majority of us, like in any other context, wanted peace. So we had peace builders among us. So we have these 64 tribes. I don't like calling it tribes. Tribes means something else. But the 64 ethnic groups speaking 72 languages. And the conflict, we have conflict almost among all these 64 groups. So everybody is fighting everybody on the ethnic lines. But one thing is certain, we have peace builders among these 64 tribes. So when I became a refugee in 2014, I was actually, and John Paul is right when he said we are born on burning grounds. I was born on a burning ground. I was displaced before I was born. I was born in an IDP. I was born under a sky raining bombs from the Sudan army forces. And one thing for me is, as soon as I got to realize, as soon as I got to realize myself, as I got to be aware of the world, one thing that I needed to do for sure was to build peace, being a peace builder, because peace is something that I was missing throughout my life. So I had this sitting with me, but then there were a lot of other experiences that were breaking me down, and I didn't know where to start. So when I became a refugee in 2014 in Uganda, this was an opportunity because we were refugees from different ethnic groups being brought together in this shared settlement. And we had no choice than to live side by side. We couldn't practice what we are doing in our country, so we were forced to live together. And to me, that was a start to try to come up with something that brings people together. At least we can build a network of ambassadors, peace ambassadors who would go back to the country and continue building peace. But still, it was very hard in the settlement to know who is interested in building peace. So it took a lot of time to engage people. And so we started to have relative peace in Uganda, in the refugee settlement. But I again started thinking about how do I reach out across the border to South Sudan. And in 2018 is when I got in contact with Unyoke Foundation. Somebody recommended me for the work that I was doing in Uganda. And Unyoke Foundation had this very simple approach. Unyoking means removing the yoke from the bulls. For those who know how the bulls plow, after a whole day of plowing, you just remove the yoke from their neck and allow them to rest. And I think this is what I needed. So I got to South Africa for the very first retreat, and they already had a group from South Sudan that they were accompanying, and I will talk about accompaniment later. They had this group from South Sudan that they were accompanying. And it was the first time that I met people that resonate with my ideas from my country. And they were from different ethnic backgrounds. So since then, we have embarked on the journey of trust building. And to say I was frustrated, when we came to the settlement, it's not like there were no peace building initiative. There were peace building initiatives, but these were peace building projects. And I was frustrated with the idea of peace building projects, because then if it comes as a project, what happens? Because project has a very short lifespan. Some of them were 3 months, some of them 6 month, 1 year project, and focusing on bringing the crowd together. And at the end of the day, the reports are, we have reached 1,500 people. And then managers are busy trying to check if there is a good story for their social media platforms. So there is nothing about peace building in projects, I must say. But I believe that peace building is a process. And for the specific context of South Sudan, how do you solve a 500 years old conflict with project of a month or 3-month-old project? So when we came together with my fellows from South Sudan, we started building a network. And building this network started with building trust. Do we trust each other? Can we get along? What is it that we can do differently? So it started to work. This network started to work. We planned a simple approach called visits. Because as a Dinka, my tribe, I heard a lot of stories about the Nuer, the major conflicting ethnic group. I had a lot of bad stories about them, but I didn't even have a chance to see the context and to see who is there and to see what if these stories are realities. So we came up with a simple approach called the visits. And that's when I had a chance to go back to South Sudan for the first time, and then we started visiting some of these locations that are highly stereotyped, some of these people. And what we found there were just human beings who were loving, who were welcoming, who wanted problems to be solved. And then it also cemented our relationships as a group, as a team that is building a network. We started building families beyond our families. And as I tell you, I am very close to some of these members of 641M, 64 children of one mother, more than my very own family. They know what happened to me in the morning when I wake up. They know what happens to me in the evening. They know where I'm going. They know that I'm in Austria right now. And this is the process. So a big question that I was asking when I was struggling to understand these processes of people building peace with project was that, okay, who takes care of people who build peace? Who takes care of people who build peace? Can we build a society where we have more peace builders interacting, accompanying each other, supporting each other, and expand this slowly instead of looking at the crowd and saying we have built peace? So the most difficult thing to conclude in this process of network building and trust building has been the power of money and resources. We really have to reflect on the colonial history of money and how it destroys relationship. And I think this showed up a little bit in our group. When money came in, there were some challenges. We managed to solve them, but we need to strongly reflect on the colonial history, the money, the power of money in destroying relationship instead of building them, and how can we use money to build relationship instead of destroying them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kuol. Thank you for these reflections, big questions as well. I think many of us are going to be taking in some of these reflections and questions and hopefully engaging with you afterwards. Thank you so much. Our third panelist, Duncan Morrow. The small story behind this is that when we were preparing for this, along with Bernadette and other colleagues at ACP, we were trying to find, the right balance, the right speakers, but also those who are available and so on. However, every single person we've consulted with said to me, you must have Duncan on board. So yes,
you didn't speak to very many people.
some additional pressure on you. So we're delighted to have you with us, Duncan, of course, with the many experiences in working in different contexts, in your own country, but also in other contexts as well, having been around different institutions as well. And in our sessions, I've also noticed that you may actually encounter the challenge of having to squeeze those multiple years of experience into a small 10-minute talk. Just a few words about you. Duncan is a professor in politics and director of community engagement at Ulster University. He has been actively involved in issues of community, peace and conflict in Northern Ireland for 4 decades. His work in peace and reconciliation has taken him into academic writing, broadcasting, research projects, policy forums, practical problem solving, face-to-face community work and youth work, as well as organizational change and politics. So, and of course, the bio goes on and on. So Duncan, building on your experience in Northern Ireland, we feel that it places you maybe closest to questions of peace agreements, institutions, governance, public systems, and the long-term effect of agreements such as the Good Friday Agreement. During the Good Friday Agreement process, maybe perhaps reflecting a little bit on that, what did civil society actually provide that institutions could not? Where did institutional structures help stabilize peace, and where did they limit or constrain it? How did you navigate the tension between flexibility on the ground and accountability within funded resources and donors and governments' agendas? And perhaps lastly, looking back, what institutional elements were missing that would have made peace more resilient? The floor is yours.
Well, I can also talk for Ireland, so I'm very good at that. So I can probably speak for too long, but I'll try and say a few words just to into this space. So 2 things. First of all, Northern Ireland is not important. And that has been, perhaps for this forum, the most useful thing about it, not being important. We're not a geopolitical centre of geopolitical activity. The consequence has been that we have had an internal conflict, and there's lots of history behind that, which has totally absorbed the entire society. And instead of finally finishing that society, the advantage of being relatively rich in the world is that institutions have held us here. And so I have spent my entire life living with conflict and then the consequences of conflict. Next year, it will be 29 years since the Good Friday Agreement. And it was 29 years between the point when the conflict broke out and the agreement was signed. And I have to say there's still a lot of work to do. So in the context of our society, the first thing I want to say is, in many ways, institutions are critical, but at a crucial level, peace is a quality in human relationships. It is not a thing. It exists actually only in the way in which we are able to do the things that you talk about. We never know, we will never be able to know that is peace. We will know that because we have made new arrangements and new relationships, we can now do things differently. It is no longer a threat for us to sit in a room together. It is no longer a threat for us to think about living next door to each other. In my society, conflict was every single level. It involved identity, in other words, who I am, and we shaped our identities in relation to the opponent. It involved our structures, because every structure imitated that relationship of hostility, every single one, and we lived and grew up, and every child, without any choice, grew up in institutions which were already in war with each other. And thirdly, it was about behavioural choices. I did not go there. I never lived there. I didn't understand that. I didn't see that. So it was in my own behaviour. And that was taught to us by my parents. It is not wise to go there. It is not good to talk about that when you meet those people. You must avoid those things. Even when we met, good behaviour was not to talk about the difficulties, because that was polite. So we had no mechanisms, and we lived side by side. And we lived in a situation in which there were actually physical walls constructed for us by the state eventually to keep us apart. So we lived literally 10 yards from each other. We knew nothing of each other's lives, and yet we were absolutely fascinated by each other. Both of these things together. And then the third thing was, funny enough, that shaped my attitudes. And change in this world is change at every one of those levels. A change of the structures will not be enough. A change at the and it is actually eventually a change in my identity, who I am. Peace for us is an entirely new world. We do not know what it looks like. We only know what conflict looks like, because that is the world which we come from. Therefore, the known behaviours are all about how we relate to each other with defensiveness, how we relate to each other with fear. And as we try to construct our institutions, the really difficult parts are about how those institutions don't simply reproduce what we already know. And all of us are children again. All of us are trying to do something we don't know how to do. And the only bridge between that is this word creativity. Creativity actually in English means Schöpfung, making something out of nothing. Where previously there was nothing, now there is something. And the only possibility we have to bridge between there and somewhere else is somebody doing something, us being together, us trying something new, and making out of that a new place from which we can do things, begin to do more things together. And it has to build into its own story. And so we have had the extreme luck, I suppose, in our society that we were at some level, as I say, held while some of this has gone on. But I have to say that peace as constructed in diplomacy looked like the obvious thing to do. Peace when it means I have to spend the rest of my life with my enemy. I not only have to spend the rest of my life with them, I have to make them my partner. Not only that, I have to change my attitude to them and their children that their future is as important to me as my own. And that is not possible to do in a bureaucratic room. Peacebuilding requires us to get alongside and understand exactly that every single step feels like a risk or to step onto ice. That does not make it not desirable. It doesn't make it even the most desirable thing that you could do. It does mean that the entire process has something to do with ambivalence. I want it, I don't want it. I can risk this, I can't risk it. And somebody, somehow, and different people have to stand on this space. And they're not always the important people. And it has to make meaning for people who are actually saying, the only peace means to me is my children can play outside and I don't have to worry about them. I can go to the library. I can go to this city centre and I am accepted to go to the shops. It is smallest things. So what I want to come back to really is this notion that peace, it's not building, actually. The metaphor is wrong because it is mechanical.
Crafting.
It is peace nurturing. It is creating the environment in which relationships can grow. It has much more to do with gardening than it has to do with building a house. We have thought that it's about us who know how to build, putting a building, and people will inhabit it. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with we ourselves moving onto complicated spaces and creating places of safety for each other. And that, in that context, sometimes, by the way, outsiders are incredibly important. If what outsiders and governments and big money can do is create spaces which we're safer and are protected and allow us to do that work, that is incredibly valuable. because we are trying to find our way into somewhere new. If they come and tell us, if you don't fill in that form, you're not getting your money. And if you don't do what I tell you, you won't be able to, you lose any resource. Frankly, go away. You're another problem for me. So all I want to say to you is, this is, and our workshop I think was really crucially important about this. This peace nurturing will involve transformation of who we are. It involves us living in a place which we do not already live, which we have to imagine, and we have to find our way to it. One of the most important things I've heard in recent years, have I got 2 minutes? In recent years was reconciliation is not it's not an event, first of all. But more importantly, the task in peace building is what we now call perpetual reconciliation. In other words, we do this and we come up with another problem, and we have to do it again, and we have to do it again, and we have to build it into our habits and into our purposes and into our stories and into our rituals and into all of the things that we do, so that it becomes slowly our story and we're no longer babies. We become able to do some of these things. We can pass these things on to our children. They have some stability. What I encourage you to do is not to say institutions don't matter, but to root your institutions in a knowledge that the institutions have to serve a human possibility, not human possibilities serve the institutions. And the key issue for people working in institutions, and I work in institutions, is, for God's sake, stay human. Re-interact with go back to making this a human society. At various points when we talk about human rights, let's not talk about rights, let's talk about being human. Too many of our conversations become fights about rights, which are important, without understanding that the rights that we're trying to achieve are to enable us to be human. So somewhere along this line, art and the art of peace building and all of these things we're talking about for me in Northern Ireland have been about how do we create the spaces in which we both acknowledge what we've been part of, can take responsibility for what we've been part of, open up to our own stories of suffering, put those into a space, and imagine that these big words, peace, justice, freedom, are not just slogans or something that one political party owns, but a quality that we're trying to reach in the relationships that we might have with each other as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Duncan. Also quoting a common friend of ours, Chris Pease, who reminded me back then when I was in Uganda attending the Unyoke Foundation retreat, that there is a reason why we are called human being and not human doing. Hence a good reminder that sometimes we get involved into the doing aspect of things, we forget to be. Instead, we try to do. Thank you so much. Last but not least, Michael Fryer, with whom I've enjoyed several conversations. We even exchanged some spices as well from our different cultures, and also played music together during these last few days. But also enjoyed the deep reflections that you, Michael, have been sharing with me. I was very much privileged, and now I'm happy that some of them will be shared with our friends and colleagues here. Michael has been working on peace building and conflict transformation initiatives since 1996. As a dialogue facilitator, lecturer, and mediator, he focuses on highlighting the links between seemingly random and unrelated ideas, themes, and perspectives, and then connecting them to the challenge being explored by those he's working with. Through asking better questions, Michael helps people move past simplistic explanations for complex challenges to help transform deeply rooted conflicts and change processes. And again, the bio goes on and on. There's more to learn about Michael and from Michael. So without any further ado, let me just shoot at you, Michael, a couple of guiding questions and give you the floor to share reflections, experience, but maybe perhaps some stories as well. Some of these questions are: what human capacities are most often missing in peacebuilding efforts today, according to you? Can you share a moment where relational dynamics either enabled or perhaps blocked progress in a significant way? And lastly, how do we cultivate these relational capacities at scale beyond individual practitioners? The floor is yours.
Thank you, JP. I once read that we teach best the things that we most need to learn. And I'm grounding that at the beginning of what I want to share to, I'm not sitting here as the detached expert, but someone who is walking, stumbling alongside you as we try and make the world a more peaceful place. If you are out in the mountains hiking and you suddenly realize you have absolutely no idea where you are, a really good piece of advice is stop. Retrace your steps and look for familiar landmarks. I think that's a piece of advice that in the peace-building world, we would do well to pay attention to and listen. One of the things that in this, as peace builders, we are faced with, it's urgent work, isn't it? It's really important. It's urgent. We need to get it done. And sometimes we go headlong into it and then only very, very belatedly realize that we're lost. What I want to do through 3 short stories is give you insights into my own personal experience in my process of stopping, reflecting on things in order to try and help me feel that I was getting in the right direction again. From a personal point of view, the last few years has been quite challenging, both personally and professionally. I would say I felt lost. And so I thought, okay, I need to stop. What's going on? What's happening? The 3 stories I want to share. The first one's from my own practice. And it was an example where I realized through reflection that I did something that showed that I was practicing what I preached. I was embodying insights and lessons that I'd learned from other people over the years. The second one is an insight from a mentor who had the courage to be vulnerable in sharing about how he messed up in a very complex situation. And the third one takes me back to where it all began for me, which was in Northern Ireland, and a conversation from about 20 years ago that I still think I have something to learn from. So story number 1. I've been living in San Diego for the last 15 years. I was invited to facilitate a dialogue in a complex organizational structure. Lots of hurt had been happening in this. I asked if I could meet with all of the participants who would be going through this process first on a one-to-one, in order I could learn from them. At the end of one of those conversations, the person who I was speaking to looked at me and said, "Why should I trust you?" And I knew that my response is going to be really important here. And I looked back and I said, "You've only just met me. There is absolutely no reason why you should trust me at this point. I need to earn your trust." And she smiled and she said, "Good answer." As I've been reflecting on that, I realized that what I was doing was, again, echoing what I'd seen others do, which was recognizing the importance of being fully present in someone else's setting, in their space, in listening, in adapting, and not pretending to be anyone other than I was, and not faking it. There was no reason why she should trust me. I said, "Oh, read my bio, do this." No, I needed to earn that trust. There are doors which will not open to me immediately because of who I am, my identities. That's fine. If I am myself and I am consistent and I keep turning up, those doors will eventually open. If I'd started on a lie, I would get found out, and then those doors will never open again. Story number 2. My mentor and former boss at the University of Bradford was an amazing practitioner, scholar called Nick Lua. He told me the story about him doing some work in Croatia after the war. He was working alongside Adam Curl, who, alongside Elise Boulding, I would say are the ignored, forgotten founding parents of the field of peace studies. They were working with a local significant person to try and get the Peace Centre in Unyoke built. They needed this person's green light in order for it to go ahead. The person was very challenging, very difficult. In the conversation, Nick found himself getting more and more worked up and more irritated with this person. Nick is a trained mediator. He's very good at what he does, but he was just getting more and more angry. Adam stayed calm. Eventually, Nick just lost it with this guy. They had an argument, and the meeting ended. The next day, Adam was invited back. Nick was not. And the person said, okay, you listened to me yesterday, now I'll listen to you. What do you think we should do? Nick, in reflecting, spoke to Adam and said, I know your values. How on earth could you sit there and just listen to him as he was speaking like that? And Adam's response was, before going into the meeting, I made a strategic decision to suspend moral judgment. The reason I went back to that story is because Nick demonstrated his humility and vulnerability in trying to teach me by telling me about the way he made a mistake. And it raises questions for me about how we learn, who we learn from, and whose knowledge matters. And most of the time in this work, it's not in a book. Story number 3 takes me back to the Corrymeela community in Northern Ireland, and a conversation I had with Ray Davey, who is the founder of Corrymeela, and his wife Kathleen. In about 2003, Ray had published a book about his diaries from the war. He was a non-combatant and a prisoner of war, Second World War, saw the horrors of the Allied bombing of Dresden and all of the horrors in Northern Ireland. And I got to know him over the years that I was there, and we had a cup of tea, and it was lovely. And I asked him, I said, Ray, when you think about your experience in Northern Ireland, everything you've seen, what have you learned? He said 2 things. He said, first thing, he said, treat everyone you meet with reverence. He says, I don't care whether it's the president or the person clearing away the dinner plates. Treat everyone you meet with reverence. And then he said, it's something about the power of positive thinking. He says, I don't mean self-help philosophy. What I'm talking about is in the moment of the darkest moment is an ability to see some possibility of something new. And Kathleen looked at him and she said, and Kathleen herself was a poet, she says, this reminds me of a line in a French poem I once read, which describes hope as the faintest hint of a bud on a tree in winter. I've thought about that story. I've told that story many times. In my own experience of feeling lost in the last few years, in coming back to that story, it's still got something to teach me. I don't know what. And this experience of reflection hasn't suddenly been a light in the dark. I now know exactly. I still feel I'm floundering. But what I would encourage everyone to do is stop. Think about the stories, the people you've met, the encounters that you've had, the advice that you've received, those anecdotes, which we typically dismiss. But think about those anecdotes, those vignettes. Think about the stories, the music that you listen to, the art that you engage with, the things that somehow help bring you back. They are really, really important in this work. They're trying to tell us something, and I think we need to listen to it.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So just a few thoughts that I picked up on before we move on to the World Cafe. So arts as a dimension to help us explore what may be missing, as per what Rana shared. Peace building, not a project, as per what Kuol said, rather long-term networks that go beyond the funding cycle. And maybe the need for support or for care for the caregiver. Maybe this is one of the foundations of the Unyoke Foundation. my country or maybe my story not necessarily important, or perhaps, as you said, in the case of Northern Ireland, not being important, help perhaps preserve it from being too central, too important, maybe too sought after. And perhaps that was one of the elements of that secured an element of stability and contributed to peace later on. Interesting for me, being from Lebanon, to maybe wish for that as well. So sometimes we do wish that we were some sort of an island that was not at the intersection of big interests and bigger players. And also the idea that we do not necessarily know what peace is. Maybe we have to come clean with this and accept it. We know what conflict is, but not necessarily what peace is. And perhaps the new trend is to consider conducting peace mapping and peace analysis, and not just conflict analysis as well. And also the idea of peace becoming a habitus, which is not a very unfamiliar word for my colleague Ursula and myself. So how to make peace a habit as well. And last but not least, the power of reflecting, the power of learning with and from others as well, as per Michael's 3 inspiring stories. So I thank you so much for everything that was shared. However, we can be a little bit more greedy by asking for more, by moving ourselves into the next part of this event, into four groups. We will have, if you don't mind, Rana, I'll be joining you over there in that corner. And Duncan, if that's okay, perhaps on that side. Kuol, there's next to the coffee break space here on this floor. And Michael, if you don't mind joining the group upstairs. Okay, and that will give us some time as well for you to share and reflect, and maybe some guidance from...
Exactly. So first of all, I think a huge round of applause. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and those anecdotes and those very deep reflections with us. So exactly, as Jean-Paul mentioned, we'll be splitting up in the same format as yesterday. I'm going to say, because we're over time a little bit, let's do it 12 minutes, just like yesterday. And I think same principle as yesterday. Once you hear the bell, please make sure to rotate. The moderators of each group, please also make sure that your group rotates. And importantly, as opposed to yesterday, we'll be reconvening here for the closing at 12:45. So please don't just go off. Please come back to this room at 12:45 for the closing. And I think that's it from my side. All clear? Wonderful. Thank you. So I'd like to start by saying thank you so much for your active participation in the World Cafe format in the dialogues. Thank you for bringing your questions, your reflections, your comments. We've received feedback from you that you've really enjoyed the format. It was lovely to see how active you were in making it what it was. So thank you for that. We will feature all of your insights, your conversations, your thoughts into the outcome process. So your table moderators have been taking notes, and all of that will feature in the outcome process, which will begin shortly as we bring this forum to an end. Just very few short organizational reminders from my side before I hand over to Tobias Lang for the final closing. Please don't forget your luggage. I probably don't need to tell you this, but if you find yourself without a suitcase somewhere, maybe take a moment to think. Our transfer to Vienna leaves at 3, I believe. 3, is that correct? At 2, sorry. Our transfer to Vienna leaves at 2. So please be on time for that, because we do leave at 2. We don't leave at 2:15, we leave at 2. So if you're not there at 2, then you will be stuck in Schleining. There are worse places to be stuck, but you may have a flight to catch. You can, of course, enjoy the art installations one last time if you haven't had a chance to take them in yet between now and your transfers. And we've also received some lovely feedback from you orally, which made me and us very happy. But we do ask you, there's QR codes. It'll show, there we go. It's on the slide, but it's also, the QR code is also on the door as you leave. So please, it really helps us. Do give us your feedback. Do share your thoughts with us. And we really appreciate that. We end with a little reception in the courtyard after the closing words. And it's been an absolute pleasure from my side. That is it from me. Thank you so much for being here. Hope to see you next year. Have a safe trip. Thank you so much. And please welcome Tobias.
Thank you very much. I'll keep it very, very brief, knowing that I'm the thing between you and the reception. Well, dear friends and colleagues, as we come to an end of the Austrian Forum for Peace 26, let me simply begin by thank you for being here and for your contribution. Thank you to our speakers, to the moderators, the workshop hosts, the artists, Wolfgang, Robin, and our friends from the Juba Art Collective, who couldn't be here, but brought their beautiful pictures. The summer school faculty, our partners, especially the province of Burgenland and the conflict peace and democracy cluster, and also our sponsors from the private internship, all the volunteers who helped us, and especially our incredible staff, Claudia and Bernadette especially. Thank you very much. Well, I also want to say I really value, above all what you brought here, all your experience, your curiosity, and your openness here at Schleining Castle, and to bring it here to the Schleining Castle, which we call the Peace Castle for our cause. Over the past 4 days, we have jointly explored peace from many different angles and perspectives. We reflected on the future of mediation and peace building. We discussed the future and the current state and the challenges of peace operations. We just took a deep dive into conflict transformation. We listened to powerful voices from Sudan, from Israel, and from Ukraine. We debated the international order and experienced the unique contribution that art can make to peace. But perhaps, just importantly, I think we learned a lot from each other over the last days. In workshops, but maybe even more importantly, informally, over meals, in the castle courtyard, and in conversations that were never on the program, but which are, of course, at the very heart of the conference. When we chose this year's theme, the art of peace, we wanted to remind ourselves that peace is both a craft and an art. It requires, of course, professionalism and knowledge, but also creativity, empathy, and imagination. An artist's profession is to imagine a reality which does not exist at the moment, and then use their tools to make the reality visible. Well, I found myself wondering whether is it not the work of peace builders. We too are asked to imagine realities that do not exist, societies beyond violence, relationships rebuilt after deep divisions, institutions that people can trust again. Our tools, of course, are different. Dialogue, mediation, diplomacy, education, research, community action. But our task is remarkably similar: to make a peaceful future before it becomes reality. Well, I hope you leave our Peace Castle today not only with new contacts. Of course, I think new contacts were made a lot here, new knowledge and new ideas, but also with renewed confidence that alternative futures can be imagined, but also created. Thank you all for being part of this journey. Have a safe trip home, and we look forward to welcoming you back again here at the Austrian Forum for Peace 2027, which is planned from the 5th to the 8th of July 27. Thank you very much. Hope to see you soon.